Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about 5 fantasy and sci-fi book series that I both started and finished in 2024. 2024 has been kind of a weird reading year for me, but one of the things I wanted to achieve was actually finishing some series because I am a serial starter of series and then I very often never get around to finishing them. Over the past couple of years especially, I seem to have started a lot of series. I've read book 1, and then no further. But I'm happy to say in 2024, I managed to finish some series. So here they are. I'm going to go into some depth here, but if you're looking for a more concise version of this list, then you can find it over here. Before we get into the list proper though, I have one special mention to make, and that is the Monk and Robot series by Becky Chambers. This is a small series, 2 novellas, that's it, but they're very, very, very good. The reason I'm not including them in my list is because I technically read the first book in the series last year in 2023, but I finished it up this year with the second book. Book 1, A Psalm for the Wild Built, tells the story of a tea monk who kind of goes out into the wilderness of what is a kind of far-flung future human civilization, where they pretty much have everything figured out. This is very much a utopia, not a dystopia, and that's what I like about it. So the tea monk is trying to find himself in the wild when he comes across a robot. Humanity invented robots some several hundred years before and had kind of been separated them for some time since it became self-aware. But the robot he meets has been sent on a special mission to go and see how humanity is getting along. The second book, A Prayer for the Crowned Shy, then continues following them on their journey. These books are slow, they're cozy, they're very much character focused, and you won't even find a lot of plot here. It's more about the 2 characters and their relationship and a kind of a deep dive look at what it means to be human. Okay, so on to the list proper, and first up we have the arc of the Scythe Trilogy by Neal Shusterman. Now, eagle-eyed viewers will notice that I haven't read these particular paperbacks because they're still in their polythene seal. I actually ended up listening to the audiobooks of these. This is another sci-fi future, but in this one, humanity has conquered death. Nobody dies anymore. Now, while that sounds great, the obvious problem is that we only have the one planet to sustain us. And in this particular universe, that is the case. We have not gone off-world. So we need to keep the population under control somehow. Enter Scythes, who are kind of appointed by the AI that runs this world to keep the population under control. It's a really fascinating premise, and I really enjoyed the kind of build-up and the world building in the first book. It definitely lived up to my expectations. These books have been around and talked about for a couple of years now. The first book I really loved. I really enjoyed this look at how a deathless society might work, and I also really enjoyed the AI aspects in this world. Governments have kind of been done away with, and humanity has kind of given up the rule of the planet over to a benevolent AI, which has developed from what we know as the Cloud today into something called the Thunderhead. It was agreed that humanity needed some way to keep its population under control, but this Thunderhead felt that it would not be appropriate for it to be the one wielding the blade, so to speak. And so the Scythes are completely separate and autonomous. In book 1, we follow 2 apprentice Scythes and we learn about how this world works through their eyes. I found it to be a really satisfying story. It finished at a really great place and I was really excited then to continue with the series. Unfortunately, books 2 and 3 for me didn't quite hit the same notes. When I originally reviewed this, I said that it was basically because there's one particular character at the end of book 1 who was kind of poised to do some real damage in book 2. And I was really excited to see that happen. And then it never did. In book 2, they were pretty much taken off the table for the majority of the story and didn't really do much of anything. And I found it so disappointing. And I think in general, the way the plot went was not where I'd have liked to have seen it go. Overall, as we then moved into book 3, I was getting back into it again. I felt invested again. And by the end of book 3, when things were all wrapped up, I was satisfied with the trilogy as a whole, but it wasn't as great as I hoped it could have been. I don't know if you can hear that. Someone is doing some building work outside and being very, very noisy beggars. Okay, the next series I have on my list is the Mistborn Trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, or Mistborn Era 1. I've been wanting to get into the Cosmere for a long time now, and somehow it just never quite happened. I learned about Brandon Sanderson when I first discovered BookTube. I'd never actually really heard of him before that, and that was maybe 4 years ago now. I had previously read and thoroughly enjoyed his Skyward series, although I did feel that the quality kind of teetered off as the series went on. And I've also read Tress of the Emerald Sea, which I also thoroughly enjoyed. But I felt like Mistborn was my entryway into the Cosmere proper. I actually ended up, despite these battered paperbacks, I ended up listening to these in audiobook format as well. And if I'm honest, I think that that's a good job because I'm not sure that I would have got through them otherwise. This is another series that now I've finished all 3 books. I can say that I'm very happy that I've read them. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the series. But in the middle of them, I did flag a little bit. I think each book I felt flagged a bit in the middle. And I know that that's kind of a Brandon Sanderson thing, right? He has the Sanderlange where everything wraps up in like the last 10% of the book, which is great. And I enjoyed that. But I did find myself feeling kind of a little bit frustrated in the middle of the stories, thinking, come on, let's have something happen. Let's get things moving. And that worries me going forwards when I get onto something like The Way of Kings, whether that's going to become a real problem. I hope not. I really hope not. Maybe someone who also started their Cosmere journey with the Mistborn Era 1 books can tell me in the comments how they then found the later ones. Anyway, if you're not familiar with Mistborn, like I wasn't 4 years ago, the basic premise is what if the Dark Lord won? So yeah, the books take place in the Final Empire, a kind of 1,000-year-old empire that has been in place ever since the hero of ages failed on his quest to save the world. And then we follow a ragtag bunch of characters who basically try to overthrow that empire. One of the big talking points about these books is always the magic system, allomancy, which is based around the ingestion and then burning of several different types of metal. Each metal has a different effect and grants its users kind of superhuman, superhero style powers. And I definitely enjoyed reading about the magic systems in this series. Yeah, it was definitely a highlight for me. The world building and the characters and the magic systems, I think, are definitely Brandon Sanderson's kind of strong points. Next up, we have a bit of a longer series with the Chronicles of St. Mary's by Jodi Taylor. I have them on my shelf here. I'm not going to get them all out, but I will get one out. Okay, so this series has at least 11 books in it now. I'm not 100% sure how many there are, but it starts with just one damned thing after another, which, in my humble opinion, is probably the best title you could possibly use for a series about time-traveling historians. Actually, if you've read the books, you'll know I shouldn't call it time travel. It's the investigation of historical events in contemporary time, or something like that. It's time travel. So this series follows Dr. Madeline Maxwell and her colleagues at the St. Mary's Institute of Historical Research, whose job it is basically to zip up and down the timeline, investigating historical events. The whole thing is delightfully British, very tea-soaked, and the Institute is very much like a kind of fusty, dusty old historian department in a university rather than some high-tech, high-flying organization. You do meet one of those later in the books, and they do become important, but that's another story. If I have one complaint about these books, it's that the pacing can be a little off. Basically, each book reads more like a kind of collection of short stories that slightly interconnect, rather than separate novels. However, when those short stories feature a cast of characters that you very quickly learn to love, you really don't mind that, especially when they're visiting lots of different historical events and time periods. It's just really exciting to kind of see where they're going to go next. And also how they're going to mess it up, because these missions invariably go wrong. Very wrong. The front cover calls them disaster magnets, and that is definitely accurate. If anything can go wrong, it definitely will. It's great to see how these characters grow and change over the books and how their relationships evolve. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll wonder why they never seem to learn to just leave well enough alone. Coffee break. Okay, my next series is actually a reread of some old favourites. The Bromeliad Trilogy by Terry Pratchett, Truckers, Diggers and Wings. My memory is hazy, but I think these may be the first Terry Pratchett books that I ever read, in which case they have an awful lot to answer for. I've read them 100 times since, and Wings was actually my favourite book for a very long time, but it has been a little while, and so I picked them up again this year, and I'm happy to say they did not disappoint. These are middle grade books that feature a lovable cast of tiny little gnomes living in a very large human world. And the story follows them as they try to find their place in what seems like a very alien landscape. This involves eating rats, fighting foxes, stealing trucks, and in building an entire civilization under the floorboards of a department store. It never fails to amaze me how Terry Pratchett can make such thought-provoking books in a middle grade format. These are very intelligent books, and they're very funny books as well. So if you want to get into Terry Pratchett and you look at the 40-plus Discworld catalogue and it's a little bit intimidating, this isn't a bad place to start. Just bear in mind that they are middle grade, but they're still fantastic reads. Okay, so the final series that I managed to both start and finish in 2024 was the Scholomance Trilogy by Naomi Novik. This is the magical school trope, but with a bit of a twist, because the school is also a prison filled full of thousands of terrifying monsters waiting to eat the students inside. These books are YA, but think more Shadowhunters than Harry Potter. These books were actually a pleasant surprise for me, because when I started reading the first one, I wasn't sure how I was going to take to the series. I'm not always a massive fan of YA books that just don't speak to me, and maybe I'm too old, I don't know. But that wasn't the case this time. Getting to know the characters as they kind of fight for survival in this sort of horrifying situation they find themselves in was really a lot of fun, even if you don't want to get too close to too many of them. There's some interesting relationships that develop, and the world building of how this whole system came about is also really fun as well. Overall, I think it's a pretty solid series. If you really don't get on with YA books, then I would avoid it. But if you don't mind a bit of YA, then definitely give them a try. Each book kind of ups the stakes in a satisfying way from the previous installment, and by the end of the series, it's definitely a satisfying conclusion. I think the second book definitely suffers from second book syndrome a little bit. It drags a bit in the middle, and it does kind of feel like maybe it was stretched out so that the ending could come in order to give book 3 a good opening. But other than that, yeah, definitely worth checking them out. So that is my list of series that I managed to complete in 2024. I've definitely got a lot left to read. There were the ones that I wanted to start this year, but I didn't manage. So 2025 is definitely looking like a fun year. I'll definitely be back soon with a list of series for 2025. But in the meantime, hit that like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in the next chapter.